Have you missed it? Like, do you guys think, oh, I should have got in on Bitcoin?
I don't spend long
5 years ago.
Bitcoin.
Bitcoin is something that certainly a lot of people think, is going to rise as an alternative currency.
The Australian Bitcoin Podcast, presented by Half-Block.
It's not a currency, it's not money. I don't understand it.
G'day, folks. Welcome to the Australian Bitcoin Podcast, where we bring you the best of the Bitcoin signal from an all-important and much-needed Australian Antipodean perspective. I am joined once again by my co-host, Mike, and we've got a special show today. I know that there are a bunch of Aussie plebs all but chomping at the bit, no pun intended, to hear that these two politely and with great civility discuss, debate, dispute, wrangle, and contend with the controversy that is BIP-110, the Bitcoin improvement proposal of a temporary soft fork aimed at tightening existing consensus rules in order to limit how much arbitrary, that is non-financial data, can be embedded into certain Bitcoin transactions. On the opposing side is JP, co-founder and host of Australia's first and largest Bitcoin-only community meetup, Bitcoin Sydney. G'day, mate.
G'day, how you going?
Very good. And supporting the proposal today is the time traveler himself, Mr. 3.14159, Michael Dunworth. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you for
to the Australian Bitcoin Podcast, episode 117, Saving Mankind or Purity Cope. Let's get into it.
Ooh. Firstly, by the way, JP, thank you for organising our Sydney meetup all the time. You do an awesome job.
My
I've been
pleasure,
there
Michael.
a bunch,
it's always
awesome.
even though we
get there if you're ever travelling.
No, thank you for saying that. And Michael, it's always a pleasure to have you there, even if we're slightly at odds in this particular discussion.
Awesome.
So for posterity,
rip me a new one, JP. Go.
We're recording at episode 117 at block height 959,219, which means there's only 2,213 blocks to go before this thing may or may not get implemented. Current price of Bitcoin is 93,875 dollary dues, which is down over the last 24 hours, which is what it is. Anyway, we've got our sides, we've got our talking points. Mike, JP, you ready? Let's go.
Okay, well, so I suppose how I'd start it, let's start as an equal track of decision making, really. So I think philosophically, from my perspective, I know that there's a lot of technical discussion in the core side and the nuance and hyper-specificity around it, let's say. I think one of the things that I am, and this is what I was saying before we started, was I'm an unk. I'm old and out of touch, and I'm totally happy to be that way. But I think what my perspective is I cannot disconnect the developer writing something from the thought that they had that produced them to write that. So that becomes, what is the philosophy of writing that in the first place? And is there a larger scale sort of trajectory that goes on? And so for me, I think I stop before I get to any of the technical stuff. I need to sort of find philosophically which direction is it going? And I think that's where I sort of think I'm missing a lot of gaps in things, because I'm sort of not even at the technical level yet, because I'm still trying to find alignment on the end goal. So if we have an end goal for the network's destination, what is that? And what does that look like? And then sort of going, okay, well, let's try and find a path for that. And is that goal something that goes for 20 years? Or is that something that goes for 500 and 1,000? And these micro parameter tweaks are all very big parameter tweaks over the destination, whatever the goal is, right? And I'm not saying there's a right or wrong goal, but I think to find alignment would be to start with what's the goal and work backwards.
I think, Michael, you and I are fairly well aligned on that. I'm the first to say, I think Bitcoin is money. Let's get that clear right from the start. I don't think I'm perfectly open and happy to say that all of that garbage, ordinals, all of the JPEGs it's absolute garbage. It's degenerate absolute garbage as well. However, and this is the thing that where we kind of have to exercise a little bit of personal discipline. We have to say, look, even though I hate it, I have to be realistic with the extent to which I can control how other people use Bitcoin. And ultimately, so even though our philosophy can align in terms of what we believe Bitcoin is, that's where the technical actually enters the conversation and becomes paramount in that, okay, let's be realistic here and let's look at what we can do. And whether or not the proposal being offered, which was originally riling plebs, quote unquote, plebs up to deal with it, is going to do that. Now, this debate also has two very separate and distinct propositions that have been rolled into a singular proposition. And I think a lot of the anger was stirred up mainly because I think many people on the BIP-110 side are starting from the premise that the actions of Core are necessarily nefarious. If you start out with that view, then no argument from Core about the technical merits of their decision to relax filter defaults in the Core node client will wash with you. You will be totally locked out to that idea. And so what it became is that so there's that. Were the
I
changes
agree.
made?
I agree with what you're
Various
saying
on-
there. Like, oh, no. Until my conspiracy's proven true that you were all in on it, I'm not going to hear anything else.
Well, that's the other side. Then it comes, okay, so there's a technical argument as to whether or not the BIP-110 mechanism will meaningfully address the problem that even people on both sides agree. And of course, I'm also willing to admit that there are people on the anti-BIP-110 side that love to put that kind of crap on the network. Look, I'm not proud to have to share a tent with those people, but that's not the angle that I'm objecting at this from. The angle that I'm objecting to this from is that I don't believe that the Core's changes to mere node filtering default policy. That's all it was. It was a change to some defaults in people's node filtering. And I don't believe that the response to that is to turn around and then let's change the consensus rules of the Bitcoin network, which is an entirely different thing. Core did not change the consensus rules. They just changed some filtering defaults to change the incentives so that this thing that we unfortunately, there's a million ways from Sunday that the spammers will be able to embed their data into Bitcoin. The whack-a-mole approach won't work because at the end of the day, you cannot overcome the idea of steganography, which is it can be completely made to look 100% like a monetary transaction. And so what we therefore want to do is it becomes then a harm minimization proposition. And that's where I believe Core was well-intentioned in the adjustment or the changing of the defaults in the latest versions, Core 30 and now 31, in the Core node client policy. But of course, that gets conflated with this idea. So there's that, and that's the sort of strong position that I take, the ability for this to actually do anything. But the much weaker position that the BIP-110 people put forward is this idea that Core is compromised. That's their stronger position, but they sort of melted all together. See, the funny thing is, it is possible that there were some legitimate grievances that people had, such as what was highlighted in Hodlnaut's series of articles, or at least the first one. I must admit, I found the third one a little bit tedious and hard going to get to the end of. But I think I'm going to admit, he made a reasonably compelling case from that side. I'm sure there could be another side to the argument, so let me say that. But at least as presented there on its face, that didn't look too good. The hiring policies, the potential, things that were around that. But that doesn't also mean at the same time that the product of that, on its merits, on its technical merits, when looked at alone, cannot still make sense.
Yeah. Okay. No, I think that totally makes sense. So we're looking at like where some people may see a small feature change. Some people may believe now, akin to a behavioral change in a person. Some people might see that and be like, "Are they okay? Is something different?" Like, because it's very out of the pattern. And so like, I think just like to give you my sort of where I started on the thought was, oh, I've loved Bitcoin Core for like as long as my entire career has been in Bitcoin, because they've been sort of setting the tone for like what Bitcoin tolerates. And they've been absolute wizards at saying no to anything. Like, you want it? No, like ultra boring. And that's because if we look at any change in a network versus a product, we can have things that are partitioned, that are mutually exclusive. But just like sort of our life as a human being, we can't pinpoint a moment and isolate it. It's all sort of meshed together into this soup that creates our identity. And I think if we're just a network of cells, and I know this sounds ridiculous, but it's actually pretty technically the same, where a bunch of nodes comprise moving in one direction. And like that one direction is towards a goal. So I think like for me, when I saw that change, that means that these group of defenders, let's call them, let's say Bitcoin core developers, they were always so resilient at saying no to stuff. And
But
so
that's actually what they're doing now. Remember, there's two different things here. There was a change to a node policy, which was a harm minimizer. Because remember, let's not forget that the node policy was no longer effective. It was effective once, but the moment it became possible, the spammers to use out-of-band methods to submit transactions directly to miners, those filters became entirely obsolete. And in fact, they were harmful, because what it meant was the filters no longer censored, or I don't want to use that word because I don't think that's really a fair characterization of what you're trying to do, but it was no longer about blocking spam, but blinding the node to the reality of what an actual miner's mempool would look like. Right? I mean, you can block your ears to the fact that this stuff is still getting through to the network, and have a totally different thing, and then find the blocks are getting mined anyway. So this was just about an acceptance of reality. But again, the response has been now, if you didn't like that, you had several options available to you. You could just keep running version 29, or you could run NOTs, or you could run version 30 or 31 and just change the defaults back to what they were.
Yep, totally.
None of it would have mattered, though, because, as I said, ultimately the stuff was all getting through. And what I would like to see, Michael, is if there was a real kind of if this really did open up, because let's look at what the actual key thing that's being used to rile up the plebs.
Yeah.
You can look at the BIP and go, oh, technically it's not about spam. Well, that's an interesting shift of the goalposts, for one thing, because the whole spam argument is what's being used to rile everybody up, as though it's some sort of existential threat to Bitcoin. Now, we've heard of existential threats to Bitcoin before, and we normally are very good at calling them out for the FUD of that it is. Yeah. But yet somehow this thing has taken control of a lot of good people and made them kind of go along with and support this FUD attack. But really, I mean, JPEGs are going to kill Bitcoin. But anyway, the point is that I would
Does it kill the focus though? Does it dilute the focus or the concentration of the community?
I don't think so. I think that if other people use Bitcoin in a different way to you, that doesn't affect your ability to use Bitcoin. Now, people can argue, oh, it's going to crowd out my transaction.
It definitely doesn't. Absolutely doesn't. But what it might affect is the chances of success at displacing a previous monetary system, right? If we're all trying to displace the previous monetary system, which has got 8.5 billion users that are unsatisfied with it, I think the opportunity to focus is probably critical to its success, given its superiority it's had over the world, or this 8.5 billion people.
I would say to that, Michael, that I think that, and back to my point about if the changes in Core V30 were as damaging as what the BIP-1 proponents claim it is, then you would expect to see some sort of surge in the use on the blockchain of ordinals. And you can actually see these charts online, and in fact, it's going in the opposite direction. And I don't say that that's due to anything good causing it. It's just that all of these things, you and I have been in this space long enough. We've seen the fads and the shit coins and the bullshit rise and fall. And it's the same thing happening with this. The free market sorts it out. And that's what we have to have.
I think you're right. The free market does sort it out, but I think there needs to be some level of orientation of what people say no to doing. And I've kind of leaned on this a little bit, but there's a very old saying, just like for human beings, for identities, for people in their journey, like the world is going to tell you who you are if you don't tell them who you are. And that's so a great example is San Francisco, where when you make rules for everyone, you make rules for no one. Now, is San Francisco an incredibly open policy city? Absolutely. And that's fun and that's cool, but it's not sustainable long term. And that's because it doesn't know where it's going and because it has no internal identity compass or framework to hover around. And now I'm not trying to be existential, but I think in networks, given the duration that networks live, which is long, so the internet or Bitcoin or any kind of network, whether it's your community, if your community doesn't have an anchor for tolerant versus intolerant behavior relative to your North Star as a community, whatever that is, probably religion's the best one to look at because they've just survived the longest. Like they're the best. If you think of making a product that'll be around forever, like the dude who goes, nah, values and frameworks. And then that guy.
What I would say to that, Michael, is that you've got people whipping up all sorts of concerns about child pornographers putting on the worst people in the world apparently putting stuff on the Bitcoin blockchain.
Yeah.
You think suddenly these people are going to have a pang of conscience because we've decided to orient our rules that they don't even need to adhere to because they can get the data in a million other ways. They're going to have a pang of conscience.
True,
that's
JP.
not what really
That's
Bitcoin's
true.
all about.
100%.
So we won't do that now. They don't care about that.
You're 100% correct that the data can always get there. And I don't think, and if anyone's sort of debating this, I don't think it's possible to argue that you cannot put something like free will exists. So I can put spam on the blockchain, but I can't coordinate a spam attack against the blockchain with a filtered system because you can say I've got Slipstream or Mara Slipstream or Libra Relay. Absolutely. But the biggest element you can't control or predict because of that, it's out of band. You can't coordinate with 1,000 or 2,000 or 5,000 actors.
But that's true post BIP-110 as well.
Pardon?
That's still true. Even if BIP-110 became not only activated, but became
possibly. Okay, so let's just consider this.
Let's
consider this. Would it be 1% less likely though?
It would. Well, I think the calculation.
Would you give it like a
apparently
percent?
it would be 0.4% more expensive to do this.
Sure.
0.4% more expensive.
So 0.4%. 0.4% is very small to you and I, right?
Yeah.
But if we have a difference of 1%, and it's in a network, which a network, remember, they're not mutually exclusive. Nothing is mutually exclusive.
What I would say though is that
so yesterday's decisions affect today's network a lot, and 10 years ago's decisions affect them even more, which is just like if we increase our output 1% every day, we don't have to do 100% to have a silver bullet.
But you're sort of
we go 1% every day.
We do it 1% now, then what we've got to go through all of this in another 12 months and keep
well,
playing
1%, we should be assuming the place of we're always going to be going through it, period. And that's why 1%.
Or we can trust that the free market and we can trust that Bitcoin has been designed properly.
I think you've got to, anything you want to keep focused, JP, you've got to, you have to define your focus, which means you've got certain things that are out of scope. Because if you don't do that, your time is never consolidated or used correctly. So back to changing just a 1%, just 1% improvement. I agree. There's no silver bullets. I promise you, I love there is no silver bullets. I love the challenge of that idea. But 1% change every day, if you don't change at all versus me changing 1% every day, over a year, I've grown like 3,700%, and you've
Michael,
stayed
I'm afraid
still.
that analogy breaks down in that it isn't practical to sort of twiddle the knobs on Bitcoin every single day. What would we require a soft fork every single day to?
No. I think if we considered the second and third order effects, what happens with open node relay policies versus closed relay policies? Like, so if in the event that core, we sat down and we go, okay, core, they're changing this button. How does that affect it? So if you ever do product design, when you go, we're going to change the size of this button and we're going to A/B test it.
Right.
That's got a huge second order effect. And I think by saying it's just, we're changing the default, that's like saying, what will the difference be between my dating app if I force people to by default have to have a picture, a profile picture.
Sure, but I would put
Versus
to you, Michael,
by
that
default they don't.
we actually
These are sort
have.
of
We've got
seeds
the
that propagate, and that's I think that's where my brain's stuck
yeah.
because I
Well,
can't not
the
think
good
of it
news,
like that in a way.
Ben, is we actually have this data. We can see, okay, this is when Core V30 was released.
Yeah.
And this is the amount of arbitrary data on the blockchain. And we can look at that graph and we can see that there's absolutely no connection between when the so-called floodgates were opened because of this default change. By the way, there's twice as many people using when you add up the the Core V30 nodes and Core V31 nodes. I just checked this morning.
Yeah.
There's twice as many of those people now that are using knots, or at least signaling the BIP-110.
Yeah, okay.
Where's the floodgates opening? It's
Well,
dribbling
so
off
here's the
just as
thing.
we predicted it would.
So let's say I agree with what you're saying,
the game
JP.
theory here. The game theory says that if we can get I think, look, back to the fundamental. I think you and I talked about this before, Michael. I think the fundamental real problem here is that not enough people are using Bitcoin yet for financial transactions. And if that were the case, they would very, very quickly. Well, you want to talk about like a 0.5% improvement in terms of what BIP-10 does. The moment more people start using Bitcoin for transactions, the moment all of this spam just doesn't become 0.5% more expensive, it becomes orders of magnitude more expensive, or at least several times more expensive.
Yeah, I get you.
And it's already dying before that happens because it's just a fad. It's a stupid, shitty fad. Like all of the other shit coins of the past.
I agree there, JP. I agree there. But you know what's even better? Like, let's say these spammers are trying to do things that require the coordination. Like, I think like if I could choose to derail someone's resource, like if I could choose they can never have either money or the ability to coordinate, I'd probably go for the ability to coordinate as a threat neutralization tool. And less so being like, oh, I don't have heaps of money. So most people don't have heaps of money. So it's a small group that would have to pay to play. And I do agree, like filling the block, like being like, hey, this club's busy. Sorry, guys, there's no room for bad actors. Like we're already full of people that are happy. Like, like Bitcoin Alive's chock-a-block. We can't fit any more people in. Even the Ethereum conference people want to come in. Sorry, guys, we're full. Like that's what a block is of Bitcoiners. Let's think about it. And so I think but I do worry, JP, and this is my concern, I think, is like almost the worry that people discount is now, yes, the chain. So let's look at the chain's data, the chain of how many JPEGs are there or not there or whatever. They may be flat, they could be down. But if I think of the chain, so whatever is on chain comes from a human first. So if I know what the humans are thinking, then we can probably see what's going to happen on chain. So if you know that, let's say you and I know that 10 people are going to do BRC 20 airdrops or something on chain in 2 months' time, you and I can look at that block item and be like, all right, there's going to be a lot of different activity in this region because we know they're doing some, token sales or something. And so I think we've got to try and nurture the focus off chain so that we're preserving, so we're not all pissing in the pool in a way. And I'm not saying that
I agree with that. In fact, that's one of the things that potentially is damaged by the BIP-110 implementation is the ability to do a lot of things off chain.
100%. Well, let's not say BIP-110
damage. They look like money, but because they're a hook to a completely to a side chain or a second level protocol, which is where we should be pushing all of that other junk.
You know what looks good? Yeah, exactly. We should push it, but I think
so. I don't think any of what you said. I'm not sure how that sort of improves your improves the reasons for adopting BIP-110.
Well, I'm saying let's consider the focus of the community as just one thing, right? One data point, and we'll measure focus as a means of alignment. Like call it some parameter that we both go, all right. We know it's more hostile right now than it was. And I'm not saying that's good. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just saying it is. And it's like, we are not as all aligned. Like I listened to Brandon Quittem and Danny Knowles yesterday, and they said 2018 to 2022 were the glory days. We were up and back against the wall trying to get a bank account. No one could get a bank account. But you know why they were the glory days? Because we were all on the same team. And I think that alignment gives us predictability for the future. So one of the things that I'm really anal about is especially with Bitcoin, because if it's money where we're not the problem with fiat is we got to figure out how to make it every day. As where Bitcoin, it's like, well, if we just don't break Bitcoin, then we know that it's going to basically have these predictable properties if the only alternative is
that's
a fiat
why
system.
we shouldn't be kind of trying to twiddle. We shouldn't be so reactive to a bunch of idiots putting crap on the
I
network.
do agree with
Well, let's
that.
twiddle the knobs frantically to try to, again, to use the analogy, to play the whack-a-mole.
I
and
know
start
it's
getting the
whack-a-mole,
market.
but think, JP, let's think about our 1% improvement every day. Like fitness is
But
a
it can't be a
whack-a-mole.
1% improvement every day. You're not going to soft fork every day. You're
Well,
trying to
it's
do
a
a 1%
1%
soft fork
improvement
that actually
over
has a lot of
every
other
finite
disadvantages to it.
duration, though. So, like, let's say I'm improving 1% over X period. You're not. Let's just like
We're trying to
mathematically, we'll
improve
say
one
we're.
within
I'm
the
not saying you're
context of
not. I'm
this
just saying, like,
whack-a-mole.
in this hypothetical, improvement is always going to be good, but I think it's sort of what are we improving? And I think my thing is this is where I become like an old grandpa, but it's like if I could improve anything, I'd actually improve a list of what Bitcoin sort of says no to doing. Because, and I know a lot of people say, oh, that's censorship. And it's like, guys, well, if Bitcoin does want to be taken seriously, remember, we're fighting the heavyweight champ of history, not like Mike Tyson. We're talking like the biggest, bestest designed system that's got, 8 billion people using it. That's awesome. But to be really seriously trying to displace that, but also
I don't think we are, though. There is an outside group of people who absolutely don't care what we think about what it is they're putting on Bitcoin.
Of course,
And
but
then
you know
they're
how
going to
good Bitcoin
continue-
can be,
they're going to
JP. So
continue
wouldn't you
not
want
to
them
care.
to
They're going to
get to
continue
your
not
level
to
of
care about
consciousness on
that.
it?
Even
Sorry.
after BIP-110, they're going to continue not to care about what we think should be on Bitcoin. And you can't make this analogy with things like, a lot of people like to make the analogy with like, Trump's border wall. Like, what's the point of putting the border wall up if they're just going to dig under it or a few people climb over it? In that case, in the physical world, you can actually do something whereby something like a big improvement, like say just blocking 80% of people is useful. But when it comes to something like this, if there's even like a 1% hole left, and I put that down to something that no amount of whack-a-mole or whatever or improvements can ever stop, and that's steganography.
Yep.
Once that exists, the whole lot can go through there. It's one of those things whereby you just have to write the code once and use it many, many times.
Yes.
That's not the same in the physical world. So therefore, it's like, so what we have to do is take a more sort of chess-based analogy here and look, okay, I can kind of see the way this is going to move back and forth down the line. There's no point, like, we don't have to actually run the game right through to the end. We can make a stand where it's actually possible to make a stand. And that is to rely upon what we've always relied upon. And remember, what Bitcoin ultimately is beautiful game theory. It's an alignment of incentives, not this idea that we have to intervene all the time and come up with ever more rules in order to try to avoid what you're doing. That's a sort of like an ad hoc approach. What you're advocating there, that 1% thing every time. It's a kind of ad hoc approach that has a lot more in common.
It's reactive because the system's dynamic.
And it has a lot more in common with the sort of centralized fiat kind of institutions that we're kind of getting away from. Where Bitcoin completely diverges from that, if I could just finish my point, sorry, David, is that
you're right.
it relied instead on aligning the game theory. And I think that the game theory of Bitcoin will prevail ultimately over spam, not only because the spam is a fad that will die away, but also because as we do our job, and that is to get Bitcoin more widely adopted as a financial mechanism, then those financial transactions will very rapidly price out the spam, because spam is actually very, very expensive because of the amount of data it uses. A transaction hardly uses anything.
If we have Bitcoin as multiple things, though, and I'm accounting for adoption,
can't control it.
No, you can't control it, but you can do your part to minimize it, right? I can't control people littering, but I can do my part to stop them abusing the fact that I can't control them.
Yeah, but you can put rubbish bins in the park, and that way you make it easier for the rubbish to go in the rubbish bin as opposed to being on the ground. That's why the change was made to incentivize the junk to go in the OP return.
I understand that. So
then the nodes can prune and chuck away.
Yes.
I'm going to ask this question. Yeah. Hang on, sorry.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
So is one of the core points here that on both sides is the fragility. Like Bitcoin, we wouldn't necessarily describe as fragile, but there seems to be a real heightened sense of protection for this thing because, as you said, we're going up against the heavy welterweight champion of the universe. Like it's this gigantic thing. And so we're trying to nurture and train up this thing to be more resilient. And we talk about anti-fragility and these sorts of benefits. You know, the block size war, it absorbed all of that and was stronger at the end of it. And I've spoken to you, Michael, off out of band, so to speak. And and you know, you sort of are one of the points you made was that you're advocating it from cool, let's kind of suck it and see, and we'll get some information, we'll get some feedback, and we'll see if this thing is as good as we all say it is. So where does this notion of fragility, am I wrong in thinking that both sides are, yes, pulling in the same direction ultimately, but
We're
they're
still
just
on the
thinking
same
about
set
how
of
to
train
carry
track,
this
I
delicate
think.
China across the line?
I think,
Well,
though,
I
we do
think-
have very different views on the extent to which Bitcoin is fragile, though. I would suggest that that the BIP-110 people believe Bitcoin is far more fragile than it is. Hence the need
Right.
for them to continue to have to affect it, to modify it in the way they're proposing. Whereas I'm suggesting that it's the market will take care of this as it has. Bitcoin is designed in that way. It's anti-fragile.
Yeah.
And by the way, it's funny thing is the same people that also say that we're kind of due for this. We're sort of going up against this sort of, what is it, David and Goliath against the big system. They're also the same people that complain about the fact that those very same people are actually embracing Bitcoin and coming into it and actually integrating it into their own products rather than opposing it. They're actually getting on board themselves. Yet those same people hate that.
I can tell you, I can explain one thing from that, which is, so you want, like, let's think about BlackRock and stuff like that, right? Now, if BlackRock is buying up lots of Bitcoin, that's exciting. That's cool. They don't hate us anymore. Cool. We'll start with that. But if they then are proposing forks, or they are proposing, and I know BIP-110 is, you know, talking about soft fork and stuff, but I'm saying that what they're doing, they're centralizing or decoupling the incentives a little bit. So let's say Michael Saylor wants to make master fork, and he goes, everyone who forks off with us, all the hash rate, they will get extra dividends next month in their STRC product. Now, does that work? Probably, because everyone wants money.
Well,
like
I don't think it will. I think
well, I'm just saying, let's just consider that a non-zero chance of something happening, right? Like, and that's a any possibility.
You know, that BIP-110 succeeding as the majority fork would actually make such an eventuality more likely, because it would actually.
So what I'm saying is that you can,
change.
So what I'm saying is that BIP, with these guys coming in, is the dialogue and the way that this thing grows, Bitcoin, let's think of it like a seed or a baby or something. If it's influenced more by these external incentives, is that going to change how things propagate? Is that going to change how my son grows up? Is that going to change how my plant grows? If Bitcoin is a plant at all times, it's the seed of some future
I would
moment.
suggest to you that changes such as you fear that could come about due to the institutional involvement that you've just mentioned would appear to people to be far more likely if this latest change, BIP-110, actually succeeds in activating. I
didn't get to finish the point, JP, but what I'd say is you have no problem if Bitcoin's expanding into these systems and all of a sudden the way that would look, right? If it was expanding into these systems, let's say the Wall Street and this, and people call it the, speculative attack, Bitcoin speculative attack. Now, if it was attacking the system, what we would hear outside of Bitcoin in the traditional market world would be not your keys, not your coin, like the properties of Bitcoin, the sovereignty properties of Bitcoin, they would be infecting that system. Now, if Bitcoin as a system was getting infected, it would be, oh, that doesn't matter. That core principle doesn't matter. That's not really a priority. And then you'd start seeing all these different phrases in your zeitgeist, let's say. And I think that's a fair thing to say. It's a natural evolution where you're going to have two systems competing.
Were you pointing at any particular principles that were
I think I'd say, like, let's do a data sample of dialogue from people that currently hold Bitcoin. I think that they would have said, not your keys, not your coins, much more in a previous era than that would be said today.
I do agree with that, yeah.
So, like, the density of that phrase in the word cloud is lower now. And I think
what I guess my response to that would be is that I would rather see, obviously, we'd much rather see people holding their own private keys, no doubt about that.
Yeah.
But the opposite end of the spectrum is them not having any Bitcoin at all and just being in fiat. So maybe at least
So
Bitcoin
true.
exposure is better than nothing.
And that's a really good segue, JP. So here's what I'd say is something in that mindset, right? It's sort of like, oh, at least they've got a ticket on the boat, like, or they've got a seat on the rocket ship, or if it's going up, their exposure is sort of arm's length in a way. Now, I think what you want in that position is I'm all for people like Michael Saylor bringing on new people in the peripheral in a softer way to traditionally, don't lose your keys. You're dead if you do. This is all your fault if you fuck it up. And, you're like, whoa, dude, I don't want accountability. Get the fuck out of here, which is sort of true, right? We're all built with insurances and backups and all that stuff. So with what I'm saying, though, is like, if Michael Saylor was saying Bitcoin's a bearer asset, I can custody it, I've got self-custody, nobody can take it from me, that is a much different conversation that would propagate the network much differently. If he's like, if they don't have their coins, if they don't prove their reserves, never talk to them. That would send a lot of people on a different mentality, and that would reflect differently on chain with more self-custody, lower custodian use, blah, blah, blah. So we can see that there's directly the social side of everything has a direct technical correspondence with.
At the same time, though, that I can accept that.
Yeah.
Although we are drifting a little bit off the.
Yeah, I know. Sorry, I'm going there.
Okay,
Yeah,
no,
just to give my mentality. Not
that.
saying it's right. That's saying how I'm sort of
I can
perceiving
sort of
it.
see where you're coming from, and that again, even though we're drifting away a little bit, to which I'd say, look, for as far as everybody else is concerned, it doesn't stop anybody else from using Bitcoin the way they want to use it, which is obviously taking personal self-custody. I'd also say as well that we've spent the last, just on that general topic, as Bitcoiners, we've spent the last 10 or whatever years telling people what a great thing this is and how it's going to take over the world. And how beautiful a monetary system it is.
Yeah.
And now suddenly we're getting sort of butthurt and surprised when the people that we've been trying to convince of that have decided, oh yeah, we agree with you. Let's get our company into it.
So I think there's a quantity versus quality, right? Like if you get people 100 million people into Bitcoin, and you've told them all that Bitcoin's shit, but paper Bitcoin is good. I'm not saying that's what's happened, but I'm just saying theoretically, right? Let's say a simulation. If you get 100 million people, they're all 100 million closer to Bitcoin, but they're never going to get there because they've been.
Oh, I agree. It's not.
And
ideal.
so
it's not ideal
what I'm saying is we want to kind of
there.
curate in a way where just because we've got 10 billion people now holding Bitcoin, if they're not on the path, like the correct path, where if you're starting somewhere, it's like, oh, I started with master shares and then or MSTR shares, and then I got into self-custody and I bought a node from Ministry and Nodes. Shout out to Catan. I think we've all bought one from you too. Village Bicycle node operator. But that sort of sends us on this path of a different journey.
Look, I agree, Michael.
And I think my only concern, JP, is that seed that was planted with the core 30 just a default change. Absolutely, it is just a default change. But one of the biggest things that breaks any network or any system is always the easiest path is social engineering. So how can I socially engineer this chain to not today or tomorrow, but to soften the stubbornness of the Bitcoin?
But again,
that's what I worry about.
What you've actually done there is, I think, is potentially argued against your own position.
Probably. That sounds like something I do.
Because if you really did want to socially engineer Bitcoin and divide the community and get it, we're not focused on a whole bunch of other things we should be focused on. We should be focusing on getting more people adopting Bitcoin as their unit of account and medium of exchange. But instead, we're fighting against each other over something that's ultimately not going to, that's not even going to solve the problem that the people who are drumming up this whole controversy want to actually solve. So
this brings up a question that's been running through my mind, and I don't want to harp too far on it because identity politics is kind of retarded, and it's certainly entered the fray. And I find the tribalism within this debate to be pretty nauseating, to be quite honest with you. Everyone's acting fairly regarded on either side, to the point of literally making claims of saving mankind, which I found a little cringe. But
a little bit of an extension there. I get it, but it's an extension.
Yeah. This notion, though, of identity within the thing, and as you say, JP, we are kind of all pulling together into this one network, which we call Bitcoin, and we should be focusing on adoption. That's certainly what we do at Hardblock.
It would actually help the spam problem.
Well, this is one of the reasons we give you $10 when you sign up with a new account and verified at Hardblock. If you just use the various codes in the show notes.
Nice.
You're looking for a hassle-free way to buy Bitcoin in Australia? Hardblock makes it easy. As Australia's longest-running Bitcoin-only exchange, their mission is to help Australians simply and easily buy Bitcoin and take it into self-custody. There are no deposit or trading fees, just a clear 2.4% spread. That covers operating costs, so you always know exactly what you're paying. Withdrawals are just $1.18 or as low as 400 sats with AutoSend. There are no hidden charges, no surprises, just a fast, reliable, and easy way to stack sats with total transparency. Get started today at hardblock.com.au. Bitcoin made easy for Aussies.
Because you'll get $10 and then you'll get on board the rocket ship or the train or whatever we want to call this metaphorically. But the notion here is that it is devolved somewhat, and it's been taken apart by this sort of narrative cultivation, and it's split the sides and it's divided a lot of people to the point where, they're calling each other names online, which, what else is new? But the notion really should be that we can accept the results of this conversation without turning the technical positions that we've each got into like our identity and also treating everyone as enemies. I think, and that's the thing, that's the giant distraction that we've got to tend to overcome here, because it is working. If you're a neutral observer sitting back, you're like, well, both of these people are pretty retarded. Let them fight and then see if the world wants to adopt your money, because apparently you guys can't even get it together.
Well, it's interesting you say that, and again, I don't want to break the spirit of wanting to reach out and mend the divisions, but look at where there's a certain rhetoric that has come from ultimately some very highly placed people, the people that are essentially at the leading a certain movement. And what do? They've made all sorts of, smears and accusations about, it's all innuendo. There's no real substance to it, but, the whole Andy Back thing and Epstein Island or just straight out Luke Daschner calling anyone who disagrees with him a pedo. I mean, is this productive dialogue? Is this what you want to hear from someone who is supposedly the primary technical, prime mover of that movement? Basically reducing the whole other side's position to one of essentially, pedo apologetics.
I definitely think the social layer has a level of connective tissue to the outputs on chain, and I think that's important to see what happens today, tomorrow, and 5 years and 20 years time, and how were those decisions or decision makers influencing things. I don't think it's sort of like you disagree. I mean, I definitely know, like, the reality of BIP-110 is it's more of a, like, from my perspective, it's more of a do something versus do nothing. And it's sort of like, do something,
but
like, because we want to keep it focused.
Bitcoin's that, like, you have to, like, Bitcoin for once in history takes away that, but it fights that urge. Like, that's politics. That's
well, no, I agree with that, JP. I agree with that. I agree with exactly what you're saying. What I'm telling you, though, is that at the social layer, a default setting changed. And I believe that the change of that setting, while it is just a button, it is just a line of code, that is the same as a very influential sliding doors moment. And what I'm saying is that, well, you might not think so, but we're never going to be able to tell. And the only data point that we have right now is the misalignment of the community before and after.
No,
so on a social level,
data point, we actually have a much better, more accurate, and more
but the community of the decision makers, so nothing could be more accurate than. No, but JP, the nodes don't operate without a human. So if the human is misaligned, I know the nodes are misaligned. So my goal, if I've got lots of misaligned humans, that will proportionately reflect on chain with how misaligned the nodes are.
Right now, we have, in terms of the misalignment, again, I'm just quoting figures here. This is figures that you can all look up.
Yeah.
we have about 1% of the hash rate signaling for BIP-110. So yes, there's a misalignment, but let's put that misalignment in perspective.
Do you
With
mind?
1% of the hash
Do you
rate, and
mind?
at best, 50,
Well-
if you believe them, because nodes can be sybiled in a way that hash
Yeah.
rate can't be. At best, you've got 15% of the nodes of the
Yeah, of
signaling
course, of course.
We've seen this before. We've been through this before. We went through this with Bcash. They all said the same thing.
I think it's a little bit of a different scenario though here, because the change from a default setting is going to kind of look invisible to the consensus layer, but it will have a direct connection to what's happening on the connection
And again, I
consensus
would
layer.
repeat as well, though, the spammers weren't waiting for the permission of some default setting in order to put their garbage on the chain. They don't
Of course.
care.
No,
They're
of
not
course I
waiting.
know,
Can
but
I
maybe
just
they
ask a
weren't
quick
waiting.
question, JP, just on, because you keep mentioning some of the data. Do you know, can you tell if since Core V30, where they removed the data carrier cap and supposedly gave this better pathway, this better rubbish bin for people who put their rubbish in, since version 30, have people actually adopted that? Have the spammers moved to that, or are they still using the old rails anyway?
Well, what you can see is that there's less overall use of.
And that's because the fat is down.
low
The fat is
overall.
dying.
I'd have to look at it more carefully to see if there's like a breakdown of whether it's shifted from one to the other. But it certainly hasn't opened the floodgates. And in fact, what's happened is just as we've been predicting on our side, we're letting the market do its thing. It's dying of its own natural death, like all of these fads do. And that's without us making any kind of meaningful improvement in the amount of people using Bitcoin for financial transactions. It's all over Red Rover once people start going back to the days. We've had this before, by the way, where it was all financial transactions during the fork wars, during the block size wars. Blocks were full back then, and there was. Can you imagine under those circumstances trying to put the spam on the network? Then it would be impossibly expensive. And by the way, to address a couple of other points Michael made, I think, and if he doesn't mind, I might sort of extrapolate on those a bit, because as I said, we've spoken in the past, and I know Michael has made the point about the sort of nation state attack essentially defeating that argument I just made, in that the nation state can afford to pay any amount that they want to flood the network with spam. Well, if that argument holds, then we are screwed either way, because the nation state could simply attack the network in the same way by doing purely financial but futile transactions. It could just move the same Bitcoin from one hand to the other 50 billion times and pay whatever they had to pay for it. And in that way, they could crowd everybody out from using Bitcoin. So if that argument holds, and I don't think it does, because I don't think the incentives align for.
Well, you've got to remember they control the energy
We're
grid.
screwed either way.
They control the energy grid, which is the defense mechanism.
Yeah, but there's lots of governments and lots of energy grids.
Of course.
And
absolutely.
again, that argument doesn't advance you in BIP-110.
I think what it's saying, JP, is that they've got such an advantage that you can't afford not to be focused on one thing. And now you might be the smartest guy in the world. You might be the best athlete in the world. Sabrina Williams, Venus Williams, age 3, tennis racket. It wasn't tennis and soccer.
Okay, well,
it wasn't
again, I think you
and
might
this is the level that we need to think of it of. It's a 17-year-old kid, effectively, a digital consciousness of us. It's like a shadow of all of our pieces.
But I think, Michael, that's an argument again against your position, because what we're doing in the non-BIP-110 side, we're just carrying on.
But socially, you're unfocused.
Running the same software that ran.
True. But
You
socially, you're not. You're not
drumming up
so
the
socially, you have a higher tolerance for what's considered, as where you don't know what money is. So you that's your perception.
No, I know what money is, but at the same time,
you know what money is, but I'm saying your representation of it. Money is not a picture of a dude's anus with an eggplant on it or something, and yours
No, of course not.
No, well, I mean that's what Core now opens the door for that.
No, they don't. No, they haven't opened the door.
No. I'm saying, hold on. I'm saying to JP, stop. JP, for one sec. I'm saying by changing the defaults socially, someone has now allocated a slot of tolerance for that to be considered a currency.
Except that again, the rest of the people doing this weren't waiting for that
So
invitation or that
you've
slot at
by
Golden.
definition,
They weren't
JP,
waiting
we've
for it. They
allocated
didn't
a
mean it.
slot for something that is a waste of time
The
that you
slot
know
at
is a
Golden
waste of time.
is not what they needed, or they didn't require it. They weren't waiting for it. And in fact, if anything, there's an incentive. If they're going to do it, like you have to sort of bow to the inevitable and say, okay, they're going to do it. Let's make it's incentivize it so that it at least goes into somewhere, such as the OP return data, that doesn't have to be kept in everyone's node until the end of time. That can be
So
permanent.
that's
You
a really
embed it
good
in a
point.
financial transaction, like they're going to do with the if BIP-110 actually became the main implementation. Then it would be wedged in there, looking identical to a monetary transaction forever.
Well, I think we've got to know what metric we want to optimize for. And I think that, let's say, you're saying you've got rubbish bins now. Core's just made rubbish bins. So this is good. It's a consideration for the other people, blah, blah, blah.
It's just a harm minimization.
No, of course. Harm minimization. I get it, yeah. So that would imply Japan should have the most rubbish because they've got the least bins. But the way that they stop littering it's socially unacceptable.
I think there's a sort of another fundamental problem.
What I'm saying is that the rubbish lands on the ground after the thought. And if you can deter the thought, you increase persistently over the duration of the chain.
The thought is not deterred because it wasn't what they were doing. They were able to put this stuff on perfectly.
If it's socially less acceptable, coordination becomes socially more impossible.
They're not waiting for what you or I believe is socially acceptable or not.
They
They're not
have
part
to.
of that conversation.
No, this is the thing. They can't coordinate without it.
They're not part
So
of it.
would we suggest that dick butts on the blockchain are the shadow self, Michael, that we all need to come to terms with and reconcile?
Well, I
over
think it's
time?
just an immaturity. It's like kids when you'd say, like, oh,
It's
hey, you
equivalent
can't
of
do that. It's
scrolling a
like,
doodle
but they
on the
don't
money.
know.
Like it's
They
scrolling
don't
a
have
doodle on the back
experience
of
at
a bank
scale
note.
with like these sort of systems, I don't think. And that's why it's like, like if you want to give everyone like a kid, a parent, right? A parent is going to feed their kid nutritious food because it's good for them. And like if a kid goes, no, you're censoring me, I want ice cream. It's like, that's neglect. Like, and Bitcoin, if we know that there's an optimal path, just like you said before, JP, you know that stuff isn't money. So why would I allocate a physical, social, emotional, or mental slot for it when we're in a world full of distractions?
It's a concession. It's a concession to the inevitable, is all it is. You're not allocating.
No, it's not. It's a tolerance for the inevitable because you're giving them facilitation to coordinate.
They had that already.
No, they didn't. You can't coordinate 10,000 transactions. One sec, JP. You cannot coordinate 10,000 transactions through Slipstream or Libra Relay. They have to get accepted. They have to get bought into the chain. They are special treatment. So any system that I'm trying to attack, the reason why when you go into war, if you're in the army, do you know why they set their watches?
The thing is, these analogies, they don't hold with Bitcoin.
They do because it's all networks, JP. You're talking about it like it's software. It's like biology. That's the nature of networks.
But also,
now, just because the topology is digital.
Remind people, is an entirely new phenomenon that has never existed before. In fact, it's something that people didn't even know was possible until it was demonstrated. Solving the Byzantine generals problem, which is what makes Bitcoin work. Solving distributed consensus over an open network without a trusted third party. That was not something people even thought could be solved. Therefore, it spawned an entirely unique thing. It's a totally unique system that by its very nature defies direct comparison to many other things.
No, it doesn't. Solving that problem is definitely unique.
These are the things that you
a monetary network is no different.
Solutions, which is entirely antithetical to the way Bitcoin is supposed to work. Many of the analogies you've used essentially rely upon centralized entities, centralized solutions, centralized lawmaking, all of the very things that Bitcoin is deliberately designed.
Bitcoin is a centralized protocol. Like it's written in one spot.
Right, and changing that protocol over and over again to constantly adapt to the latest
That's like putting a bandage on it, though.
Sorry?
If there's been an external thing influence it from outside of the chain's rules, bandaging it is different from changing it. Like
If
I'm
you
literally
change the
saying,
consensus rules, you're changing Bitcoin. If you change the
no,
default
that's I
filtering
literally
policy, you're not.
it's like saying, let me tell you. So a consensus rule is literally like that's like, you know, it's literally affecting the actual physical chain, let's say. But changing a default is like something that's happened outside of the chain's control. In the like, if the chain starts looking differently or acting differently or behaving differently, then it's like, what changed? Oh, on the surface where the inputs are coming from, on the surface, which is the social part, something really big changed. They said yes when they've always been really boring and said no.
I don't
Whatever it is.
think it, but it wasn't an ideological change. I think if you're,
I think it was a
if you're
change in the
if you want to
velocity
characterize
of
it as
change.
some sort of ideological
JP,
shift,
I think it was a change in the velocity of change.
it was a technical change, which is why it's important to actually, to
They've
make the
never
technical
changed
argument.
anything when
It was a
anyone has had
technical
half a
change
whiff of a complaint. So the
that not only
tolerance,
didn't materialize in the flood of spam that making such a change was predicted by the people that were panicking about it, but it was a technical change that had a technical basis, not an ideological basis. It had a technical basis.
You've got to understand that if social engineering is part of a way to compromise a system, then it is part of the system.
If you're a person drumming up hysteria over a non,
I'm not drumming up hysteria. This is just distributed networks.
Right.
Everything.
If you're of the sort of person who's like drumming up, like, oh, Bitcoin is in danger of being flooded by, not saying you're guilty of this, Michael,
Sure.
but others are very much ringing the alarm bells.
Yeah.
Then you're the one actually part of the social attack here, rather than accepting that this is a fad that will come and go, that the market will deal with, and that this was a technical change of harm minimization, and that it could be all safely ignored. Because remember that Bitcoin was designed as a flood fill network. We kept the block size small, as we're all on the side of that, is keeping the block size small so that no matter what it was filled with, be it filled with financial transactions or a combination of that and stuff we don't like, then it wouldn't overload nodes. That was the whole argument back then, because the big blockers wanted to have this sort of like this constant increase all of the time, which would have led to an exponential growth of the Bitcoin. The worst thing that can happen here with this is that Bitcoin just grows in a kind of continues to grow in a capped but lineal way, whilst the ability to store the blockchain and run a node continues, as technology does, to grow in an exponential manner.
I wanted to ask, sorry, I'm mindful of time here. We're coming up to the hour mark, and this is incredibly fascinating, and I'm enjoying every minute of it because I am yet.
It's good.
I'm just listening. It's phenomenal. But I'm curious, looking beyond immediate win losses. You know, this isn't like no one here is trying to win or lose an argument right now. This is very civilized. But beyond that, what do you guys consider the most serious second and third order consequences? You know, the unattended consequences for miners, node operators, developers. I mean, businesses, Bitcoin's social cohesion, and even obviously the fact that we want it to remain money, right? It's long-term monetary credibility. Like, regardless of whether BIP-110 activates, or fails, what have you guys thought through some of those unintended consequences?
I have. I think the distraction gets really far from home over time. Literally, I mean, just a tiny change over long periods of time, they really add up. Like that tiny good habit that you create in yourself or the tiny bad habit, they really add up. And that's what I've learned over my life. I'm not saying I'm right. So I'm sort of like, ooh.
Shout out James Clear, Atomic Habits.
Are there tiny little tweaks we can make, or are there bad little tweaks? And that's sort of where I landed, where I was like, I think that default change creates an echo down the line where the surface area for coming into Bitcoin has grown, but the quality is diluted. So it's now a mile wide and an inch deep instead of, this is how tolerated it is. It's 1 inch wide, but if you fit through there, every person becomes a power user. So it's like a slow, very linear, resilient growth where every participant is really focused on the same thing. Sort of like 300, like that story. Their numbers are much lower, But if they are a single unit, they're a really big, that's a really big advantage, because the coordination, when I know, just like a football team, when I know the guy that's running off me at number, let's say the inside center, I know if I played 1,000 games with him, I can predict the future where he will be. That gives me an edge, because now we have basically communication via osmosis, which is what distributed systems need to march forward, because if they're not aligned, at least on a really big thing, it just makes it they're too fragile at the social level. And that's what I mean. I think it's the hardest network on earth we've ever built, which is unreal. But that's why I think I'm so now laser focused on the social component, because I'm like, ooh, I feel like that's the doorway into breaking the really hard thing, because technically I don't really, there might be security holes in it, but I'm sure they'll get patched or whatever. But yeah, I feel like the social part's slept on. I think that sort of summarizes where I come from.
There's a few different things there. The first one is I think it has exposed, for example, if you were one of the people, and there are some that insist that still at this 11th hour that somehow BIP-110 is going to activate as the majority chain. They're still insisting this at the 11th hour and promoting game theory as the reason for it. Even once it's been explained to them how the game theory is nothing like BIP-148 at all. Because I remind everybody that we've more or less kind of been through this all before, at least at the social level. And that if you're one of those people, though, that's sort of making this corollary between BIP-148 and BIP-110, where BIP-148 was a successful soft fork, then it's very revealing as to, and when, of course, and as I believe it will, you will be found to have been that BIP-110 will not get more than a couple of % at best support by the time it's signaling.
I don't think this is very much like BIP-1 for to agree
I'm
with
glad you did, Michael,
JP.
because
Yeah,
I
don't see it that way. They're all of these changes
there
are
have been
all like
people
a
that have said
different
that, and
personality.
they're going to be proven
They might have
embarrassingly
similar.
wrong. These are
Yeah,
people with massive followings, and that if you were following these people for their technical knowledge, you shouldn't be, because they do not know what they're talking about. And a lot of this, so that's what a lot of this debate is flushed out, is sort of how many people just do not know what they're talking about, particularly when it goes back to making corollaries with the previous situation with BIP-148, which, by the way, that was a very contentious thing in the community as well. Lots of people argued about it, but at the end of the day, it was a very small number of people that forked away. And even they eventually, a lot of them, particularly if they weren't massively public about it, they were able to kind of quietly come back and re-enter the fold without much.
Dude, JP, when I show up at your house with steaks, you know what I'm doing.
And more or less, their previous life as a bee casher was, not too widely known. So, we get through this, we get over it, and everyone, realizes that, hey, maybe, the reality worked out in a different way, because ultimately reality ends up being the biggest arbiter of who's right and who's wrong.
Sure.
Unfortunately, too often in life, you don't have that. You've got things like things like climate change, where they can keep just shifting the goalposts and down the road. This has an actual very real activation date in 2 weeks, where we can see who the people were that did understand the activation mechanism properly and the game theory properly. We can see where those people, who was right about that, who was wrong about that. We could also see what will happen in a year or two's time. Are we completely flooded with spam and no one can get their transaction in and the network's dying?
Yeah.
Or can we see that, hey, wait a minute, actually the amount of ordinals on the network has been trending down, much as we predicted it would, as any shitcoiny type of thing always tends to do as the fad wears off. And we can also see that if the fees on the blockchain, if the block transaction fees start going up because we've been successful in getting more monetary adoption of Bitcoin, well, we can then see at the same time that kind of crap being pushed out because it's too expensive for them to do it. I mean, Bitcoin's a terrible place to put that stuff, really. I mean, it only makes sense in the extremely low fee regime we have at the moment. But again, that was one of the great things about keeping the block size small. It is ensured that a proper market mechanism would develop in order to put some real price on getting transactions into something that would essentially every node does have to carry until the end of time. And so, of course, it makes it such that only the most economically valuable transactions are put into nodes.
Can Can I ask a quick question? Just getting back to practicalities and sort of leaning on an analogy you used before, JP, which is you mentioned someone could get a banknote and they could write a word on it. They could write a swear word on a banknote, and that problem led to laws. The government implemented laws saying this is illegal. You can't deface currency. And obviously, we're stuck with Bitcoin. We don't have a government that can decree and say you cannot write the spam, and we don't want one.
Nor would we want to set a precedent where we start having to think about having one.
Absolutely. So the question I'll ask in a moment, or I'll ask it now, and then I'm going to say one more thing, which is, how can we, if that doom and gloom scenario where now that the data carrier cap has been increased, the op return field is there, and you might agree that it is a lot easier to now put exactly what you want to say in a transaction compared to some of these other archaic methods that are more damaging to the network. Now you can just straight up just drop a bunch of slurs in the op return field, and there it is.
Again, I refute the central premise of the question. For the spammers, it really actually isn't easier because they had the mechanisms that just bypassed all of this other control already. That's the central point here. It's technically more complex, but once that complexity is essentially programmed in, it's like, just push the button each time, and the computer goes.
And we're talking about this section of spammers. These spammers that are quite sophisticated.
That adds up. Lots of buttons starts getting really expensive very quickly.
But it's
it's actually the time because the latency. Sorry,
it's
Mike.
Noise compared to the market mechanism.
Keep going. What's up? I'm just doing more.
So I agree that the mechanisms are already there once they're programmed in. Yes, but now it's possible that even a Luddite can jump on and start dumping stuff into the op return field without any thought whatsoever.
The script kiddies have already actually created the complete code already. It's done. A Luddite could use it to embed the data into fully conformal.
Okay. I appreciate all that. So we'll move past that. Pre version 30, post version 30, and pre 110 and post 110, if it does activate, spam can still happen. Yes. So moving forward, and this is something that's really annoyed me, is that Core has been quite silent on the issue in general. At least the BIP-110 guys are having a go. They're trying to do their 1% change, as Michael says, even with the drawbacks that it does have, like you say. What should be done? What should be, like, if BIP-110 disappeared tomorrow, the problem is still there, even though you might say, okay, well, it'll get solved with the fee rate increasing and adoption increasing. I still don't feel like that's a good enough. That doesn't satisfy me. I feel like we, as the whole network, Core, BIP-110, whoever, anyone that uses the network, should still be saying, we do need to be thinking about this.
Yeah, look, I get it. I get this sort of, again, but that's the very human nature that Bitcoin is sort of, you need to get beyond with Bitcoin. This constant need to intervene.
But by that approach, JP, then you would never have any agency. You'd only have the data set that you would follow. So now if I wanted to manipulate you, because you're only following a certain fraction of principles, which is there's no technical solution, or this is optimal, or this is good, because you've proven not to have any foresight because you're only following data to validate. So your agency gets decayed. And I feel like that becomes quite easy to manipulate someone like that.
Unfortunately, my answer to your question, Mike, is the very thing that you sort of disqualified in the very question itself, and that is what I already mentioned to you. The market mechanism is a far more powerful way of dealing with it than anything being proposed by BIP-110, which is going to be fraught with unintended side effects, blocking potential other monetary second layer use cases, breaking potential transactions that are already open. I don't know that any of those risks and certainties are worth the very extreme marginal difficulty increase or cost increase of putting spam on the network. What you're actually ultimately talking about here, and it's been, sorry to have to use the expression, but it's been characterized many times as virtue signaling. You're trying to it's all about trying to sort of send a sort of community signal rather than actually worrying about, like, let's actually do what works rather than wishing for something. Like I used the analogy with Michael, you can sort of wish that people will behave a certain way, or you can talk about what's realistic.
Can
and
I-
set up
can
a
I
plan
say
that's
something?
gonna
Now
do
we're
it.
getting spicy.
Can I say something on the virtue signaling? So if you've got, when does it go from experience, from virtue signaling to knowledge, basically? Does it ever transition from, oh, they were just saying that's a thing that will happen?
When the proposal being made is an actual practical proposal
No, I
that
think
addresses
just
the
I think
technical
just in
concerns
general,
and
let's
does
think
what it
about this
claims to do, then
philosophically,
yes,
right?
it does.
So
So
if
yeah,
you
it
would,
can. But it,
okay,
but
sure.
BIP
So let's
110
say
doesn't.
virtue signaling, right? That's the boilerplate for every person.
But to answer your question, though, Mike, it can go, Michael, rather, to Michael.
Yeah, I know. I just thought of that. Sorry.
It can indeed go very much beyond virtue signaling. But the
Yeah.
entire point here is that BIP 110 does not go beyond virtue signaling by the very admission of people in this chat. And even apparently, we're told now, in fact, every time it comes up, it's like, well, it's not about spam. It's in the BIP. See, it's not about spam. Well, okay. Well, you were just advocating on
so
that
I'll
the
say
whole
something as
time.
well. Like, I think I totally get what you mean in virtue signaling and all that. But if I had to choose, two choices, like a sliding doors moment, is Bitcoin going to be hard money or an open protocol for whatever? Will it be as similar as it has been for my journey if I chose BIP 110 versus undoing the core 30 stuff and changing that? What would be
first of all, if you
different?
choose BIP
And so
110,
that's where you and I have a different opinion, right?
well, the
But the
practical
difference between
reality
us,
is right now.
so JP, when we say virtue signaling, it usually means speaking on things that you've got you're just trying you're trying to signal something. And I'm trying to signal something based on 10 years of experience. You're trying to signal something.
I don't think.
But just let me explain something very
experience has
calmly.
anything to do with it.
I'm telling you, I've got lots of experience in this domain.
Managing,
And you're saying that these people, let's say, I'm not saying everyone is a virtual signaler, some people are.
Yeah.
But it's very hard for me to think I'm virtue signaling and you're not. When
but Michael, I don't think you would welcome that analogy you just made. I know the experience, and I wouldn't dare contradict.
No, but you know what I mean. Like, I wouldn't
experience.
say law stuff to you. I'd be like, fuck, he probably knows everything. I'm just going to listen to him.
No.
I'm not saying appeal to authority
I
either.
would defer.
I'm just saying I feel confused as a virtue signaler. When
I would defer
people
to
tell
your
me that, I'm like,
experience when it came to sort of, for example, as you've used the analogy before, in trying to prevent spam email. I would always defer to your experience with that. But let's think about for a minute how spam email is actually dealt with. Well, you have to register your mail server. You have to also get your mail server, making sure that it's on not only doesn't appear on blacklists, but does appear on whitelists. And then, of course, you've got to have your DNS and everything all lined up. And if you get any of those things wrong, or or rather, you just get arbitrarily added to one of these block lists or blacklists, your email doesn't get through. But that's and it doesn't really matter if the odd email gets blocked. So that's
what if you created a Gmail account?
Many false positives with your attempts to block spam, as we all have to go to our spam blocks sometimes to get stuff we really want to see. You can't operate that kind of philosophy on Bitcoin. I think you understand that it's an entirely different situation.
We should assume that there's a filter somewhere because there must be certain things that are outside scope. And if there's not certain
there
things
is a filter, there's the consensus rules, and the consensus rules haven't been changed.
Sure, and if you're getting things that are putting more pressure on those rules from an external system, you're going to change something. So I'll give you a good example. What they had to do with spam, they had to put in a law about spam. And that doesn't mean that spam stops, but it means it creates a very good deterrent, which is why by default now, companies are the opposite of Bitcoin Core, which is off by default. You are not subscribed to my newsletter by default.
That's a different thing, though. Hold on. There's subscriber newsletters, and then there's then there's the mechanisms by which your own mail server determines what spam.
We're talking about an application layer because Core is an application. So go with Core being Gmail.
I get whether you're subscribed to a newsletter or not is a totally separate thing. Every mail server has to obviously looks at the centralized lists of both whitelisted mail servers and blacklisted mail servers, and it excludes and includes based on that, plus doing a whole lot of other checks that rely on centralized permission. That's nothing to do with whether you're subscribed to an email newsletter or not. All of that other stuff still happens. And it's that if you had anywhere near that kind of thing on Bitcoin, it would be totally antithetical to the way Bitcoin works and create a far worse precedent than anything Core did or spam or any of these other, the so-called threats that we're facing now would be far worse than that. The precedent would be horrible. And so again, this is why you better off actually learning to live with the fact that there are always going to be a small minority of people that are going to abuse this thing in ways that we don't like, but we have to just make peace with it, because the consequences of trying to address it in other ways, such as anything analogous to spam, would be far worse.
So I think that's sort of that's interesting, but I feel like a really good, like, I think of this really largely as an identity conversation. And it's like, who's done the best at keeping their identity lately, right? Like, if we think about the English language, it's changed 400 years between, like, just tiny tweaks, but it's changed materially over 400 years. Like, language itself has changed. That can't even stay the same. Like, I think it's really important to preserve some sort of identity. And I think there's a privilege in a really lost world today about knowing your identity. And that's why I look at someone like Japan, to be honest. Like, their culture is so rich and it's survived onslaughts of propaganda, wars, nuclear bombs, everything has been thrown at them. They have got a resilience in their culture. And I think there's something about, if I wanted to replicate someone like a preserving culture for thousands of years, I'd look at places like China, like, like all these places around the world that have managed to punch through the craziness. They've survived the craziness.
Look, I understand that, but at the same time, I don't think Bitcoin's identity is so fragile that it's going to be threatened by people putting
anything on a long enough time horizon, JP.
Because we don't even, we're a very small, we're still a relatively, even if you take the entire kind of thing, including the people that we don't like, this is a very small thing. No one knows anything about this.
Well, that's the thing, JP, because we're such a smaller percentage of the total pie, it means every decision we make today
is already dying in the market before the rest of the public even knows what we're arguing about.
I know, but see, what happens is because we're heavier pieces of the pie, like if I'm one of 20 million Bitcoiners versus one of 2 billion Bitcoiners, it's the changes that I decide today are going to affect more people than the people.
I would suspect, actually, I would go.
Like, we've got a louder voice today than the people that come after us.
But you know what's possibly given the more oxygen, the more oxygen of publicity to the whole ordinal spam thing and what these guys are doing, and that's this very debate itself.
100% agree. 100% agree.
If we just ignored them and just did what Core was suggesting, that is, look, this is not a threat. This is just people using Bitcoin in ways you don't understand, and ignored it. It would have the identity, I think, would even be less threatened by the supposed threat to its identity that you're proposing.
I think it's good to educate people on the threat or the scope of the threat, because you want everyone to know the holes. If everyone's a security guard, let's say, preserving their money.
Well, I think that's true of actual threats, but really, I don't see this as the threat that you see.
Well, let's imagine we're really clever and the sum of our decisions creates the threat. We want to make all of our decision-making to be least threat-friendly as possible, I think. Now, it doesn't mean, when I say threat-friendly, I'd say focus-orientated as opposed to threat-friendly. So it's like, I think it's interesting. To be honest, I'll get you a beer if it goes all Core and I'm uncle. But I do think, JP, don't discount focus and don't conflate focus with censorship. As someone on the other side of the combo,
I agree with you there, Michael. But again,
that's where I get nervous. I worry you guys don't value that.
Debate itself has caused the lack of focus. We should be out there getting more people to adopt.
Oh my God, JP, I forgot to tell you this.
Spreading fun about these threats to Bitcoin that aren't threats. We should be out there encouraging people to adopt.
Okay, so while we've been pulling our dicks, like talking about Core 30 and knots, dude, do you know what's happened? In Australia, every single person that sends and receives Bitcoin has to tell the ATO who sent it to them and their source of funds. So just while everyone's been arguing,
there we go.
They've just shuffled this in, and now it's literally to receive money to your exchange. You need to say who's sending it to and where are they sending it
I
from.
believe that's exchange to wallets that doesn't. I don't think it affects peer-to-peer, does it? Like it's.
Well, no, but when a peer-to-peer wants to get liquid, or if they wanted to buy Bitcoins and send it somewhere, now that sending has been labeled as you. So all these destinations out of the exchanges become sort of like labeled rings. So it's
No,
like,
I think that's a great point of agreement, Michael, that we can have.
yeah.
Here.
So we all need to figure out what's the minimum viable alignment, the MVA,
the enemy.
so we can stop getting fisted on the other side.
The enemy is always the state, not your fellow
you know what?
spamming retard
Governments,
Bitcoiner.
Like, a lot of people hate governments, and I'm not some nut hugger, but like I do get like it helps having structure. Like, because I'm really unorganized, so anything with structure helps me like put pieces where I need to or organize my own thoughts a bit. So, but yeah, like let's be good at our jobs. So I don't think the people at the moment are doing great, given how disgruntled everyone is and how no one's buying homes and chocolate doesn't melt and shit like that. It's like, what the fuck is going on, guys? Oh man. Anyway, guys, I appreciate the time. JP, thank you very much for the time.
Thank you,
dude.
Michael. It's been great.
Beers on me next time, and thanks for all the support you do for the community meetup in Sydney.
Absolute pleasure.
It's awesome.
And I hope to have
I
you
need
again
to ask one last question. This is going to be a little philosophical frag just to throw it in there, and we'll wrap this up in a bow, and we can exit the room like Gwyneth Paltrow. Does BIP-110 represent a necessary act of stewardship over Bitcoin's monetary purpose, or an attempt to impose control on the unpredictable consequences of an open, permissionless system?
I think we've kind of gone over most of that, haven't we, Michael?
I think so. And I'm sort of
both.
the idea that I'm happy to do something over nothing because I see it as a value add, but I also, people don't see it as a value add as well. So in that regard, it's just philosophical differences, I guess.
I think if you're going to.
So this was just an hour and a half of circle jerking, basically. This is cool.
I mean, I'm always circle jerking. Don't you worry about that.
100%.
100%.
No, I think what we can be doing is, as I've said, is concentrating on Bitcoin education, concentrate on actually people adopting Bitcoin as their unit of account and medium of exchange. Do all of that. And that alone, it doesn't have to have anything at all. That's what we just should be doing all the time. And this whole
and don't make it your identity.
Need to enter into it.
Don't get so hung up on it. Don't make it your thing. Don't get up in the morning and be like, I'm a BIP-110 or I'm a Nazi or whatever.
Yeah,
like, just get on with your life. Do something
see
different.
kind of one side of it actually including that in their X handles. We don't have like another thing that says core.
Yeah,
right.
I would say as well, like one takeaway that we can all be happy about, right? Irrespective of what you want in the future or your thoughts about it, at least the network has a heartbeat, like a social heartbeat. You know what I mean? If everyone was just, no one said anything, it's just whatever. That's scary because now no one gives a shit about anything. And it's like, damn, everyone's that butthurt or like everyone's that tapped out emotionally from it. So at least that's good. At least there's active dialogue. And yes, people are, you know what, we're all nerds probably because we're all in Bitcoin. So we're all retarded at being grumpy at each other, which I definitely know I suck at arguing with people.
To your credit, Michael, there is active dialogue here because I think you're a reasonable person. I hope I'm a reasonable person.
Very reasonable.
But unfortunately, I don't think this kind of dialogue is possibly, in fact, probably in the majority of cases.
We'll get there, I reckon, over time. This will be our first dance or, umpteenth dance, and sooner or later we'll figure out best paths and worst paths. And you know what? We're all trying for whatever it's worth. We're all doing our best. Win, lose, or draw.
We're going to conclude the episode at block height 959,225, which means that there's 2,208 blocks to go before all shall be revealed. Gentlemen, thank you so much, JP and Michael and Mike, for taking the time to discuss this very civilly, actually. And it was great. It was an easy job for me because I just let you guys wind you up and run. So episode 117 in the bag. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. We'll see you next time. Don't forget, you can fight back on against the war on savings by going to the link in the show notes. And honestly, just buy a little bit of Bitcoin and adopt. And as you say, JP, educate. Adopt it as a unit of account, your medium of exchange, and don't worry about the rest of it. All right, cheers.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Thanks, JP.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much,
Mike.
Thanks, guys.
Wonderful talk. Terrific. Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.